He wasn't just my stepdad, was the man who saw me when no one else did. His voice calmed the storms in my head. His eyes lingered a little too long, and mine couldn't look away. We never touched. We never kissed. But every moment we shared felt like fire waiting for a spark. I tried to run from the feelings, but the truth is I didn't want to. This is the story of how I almost crossed the line with the one man I was never supposed to fall for. Now before you judge me here, hear me out first. Hi and welcome back to Hearts Awakened. This is your surest channel for deep emotional betrayal and love stories. If you're new here, kindly subscribe, like, comment, and hit on notifications. For my returning subscribers, thank you so much for stopping by. If you had told me 3 years ago that I'd find comfort in the presence of the man who married my mother, I would have laughed in disbelief. I was 22 when Mom remarried. I wasn't against it, she deserved to be happy, but something about Dennis, her new husband, felt different. Not in a bad way, just quiet, reserved. He wasn't the loud, overbearing stepfather you see in movies. He didn't try to replace my dad. He respected space boundaries. Maybe that's what made him stand out. I remember the day I moved back home after college. My room was just as I left it, but everything else had changed. Mom had redecorated the living room. New curtains, new smell, new man. Dennis greeted me with a small smile, the polite kind that doesn't ask for much. "Welcome home, Naomi," he said. "I hope you don't mind that your mom added a few touches." I didn't mind. I told him that. He was kind. He never spoke unless necessary. But when he did, his words were thoughtful, measured. My mother, the bubbly and chatty type, seemed to do all the talking for them both. But behind his silences, I noticed things. How he always listened, really listened. How he noticed when I was quiet. How he offered tea on stormy evenings without saying a word. At first, I thought I was reading too much into it. I was just grateful someone in that house noticed me. Mom was busy most of the time, either working late or planning her next getaway with friends. Dennis was always home, fixing things, reading books, making dinner, for all of us. One night, it all shifted. I had just returned from a terrible job interview, soaked by the rain, frustrated with everything, life, expectations, the silence in my inbox. Mom was out, of course, and Dennis saw me standing at the door, tears mixing with raindrops. He didn't say anything, just gently took my coat, gave me a towel, and led me to the kitchen where the kettle was already whistling. I broke down at the table. He sat across from me, sipping tea, and said, "You don't have to always carry everything alone, Naomi." I don't know what made me cry harder, the words or the way he said them. From that night on, things changed. We talked more. Late night chats over tea became routine. He told me about his past, his failed marriage, his regrets, his loneliness. I listened. I talked, too, about Dad leaving, about feeling like a guest in my own house, about pressure, about fear. The emotional walls between us slowly melted, quietly, without either of us naming it. It was never physical. Not then, but the connection was undeniable and confusing. One evening, I caught myself watching him as he repaired the old grandfather clock in the hallway. His concentration, the gentle way he turned the gears, the patience in his face. I realized I felt something I shouldn't have. I hated myself for it. I tried to ignore it, to spend less time with him. But distance didn't help. If anything, it made me long for the evenings we shared, the safety of those conversations, the warmth of being seen. It didn't help that Mom started traveling more. The house, once filled with her voice, was now echoing with unsaid feelings. I didn't plan for it. I didn't ask for it, but it was there. A quiet, impossible affection growing in the space my mother left behind. By the time autumn rolled around, the air in our house was colder, but not because of the weather. Things had shifted between Dennis and me, and we both knew it. We didn't say anything, not directly, but it was in the way we paused before speaking, the way we avoided too much eye contact, the way silence grew louder than words. It wasn't wrong yet, but it was close. Too close. I remember one morning in October, I found a note on the kitchen table. It was from Mom, gone to Atlanta for 3 days emergency meeting. Love you both. 3 days. Just me and Dennis again. That evening, I stayed in my room, trying to focus on my freelance work. But the house was too quiet. I could hear Dennis in the living room, moving about, probably organizing the bookshelf again. He always did that when he was anxious. I gave in to the pull. When I walked into the living room, he looked up, surprised to see me. There was a softness in his eyes that both comforted me and made my heart beat faster. "I made cocoa," he said. "Thought you might want some." We sat in silence, side by side on the couch, a comfortable distance between us, but our thoughts were anything but comfortable. The TV was on, but we weren't watching. I could feel his presence like heat. Not inappropriate, not threatening, just real. "Honest, I miss having someone to talk to," I said quietly. "You can always talk to me," he replied. I nodded, sipping slowly. "Do you think what we're doing is wrong?" He looked at me, not startled, not ashamed, Just thoughtful. We haven't done anything, Naomi. Not yet, I whispered. The words slipped out before I could catch them. He sighed deeply and stood up, walking to the window. I care about you, he said, his back to me. More than I probably should. But I would never want to hurt you or your mother. I hated that he was right. I hated that this man, who had only ever treated me with respect, was caught in something that wasn't his fault alone. We hadn't kissed. We hadn't touched. But our emotions were tangled, and there was no denying that. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, thinking of how love can grow in the wrong place, show it can find light in shadows, and feel pure even when it's forbidden. The next morning, he made breakfast like nothing had happened. Eggs, toast, coffee. His silence was respectful, but his eyes told another story. They always did. I knew then that something had to give. Later that week, Mom returned full of energy and stories from her trip. She kissed Dennis on the cheek, hugged me tightly, and didn't notice the tension between us. She laughed over dinner, completely unaware of the silence that hung between the two people at her table. I felt guilty, but I also felt something else, Hartash. Not because we had done something terrible, but because what we felt had no place to go. I started going out more. Coffee shops, libraries, volunteer work, anything to create distance. But even then, when I walked through the door at night and saw Dennis in the living room reading alone, I felt the weight return. We were both trying to be good people, and maybe that's what made it hurt the most. I had to leave, not because something happened but because something almost did. Over and over again. It wasn't sustainable to live in that house anymore. The weight of unspoken feelings, shared glances, and too many quiet nights had become unbearable. So I did the only thing that made sense. I applied for a 6-month internship program out of state. Something creative. Something far. I didn't even ask if it'd be accepted. I just applied and waited, half praying for an escape, half terrified of what leaving would mean. Dennis didn't say much when I told him. He was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables. He paused when I spoke, knife in mid-air, then placed it gently on the cutting board. When do you leave? He asked. Next weekend. He nodded slowly. That's good, Naomi. I think it's the right thing. I waited for more. Some sort of protest maybe. Some confession. But that was all he said. That night, I cried in my room. Not because I was running away, but because I knew he was right. If we stayed in that house together much longer, we would cross lines we couldn't uncross. And I didn't want to live a life built on betrayal. I didn't want my mother to become a victim in a story she never even saw coming. In the days that followed, the air between us softened. Lighter, like we had silently agreed to set each other free. He helped me pack, even fixed the handle on my old suitcase without saying a word. On my last night, we sat in the backyard. The stars were out. The air was still. I'll miss you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'll miss you too, he replied. There was a long silence before he added, you were never a child to me, Naomi. You were a woman with her own mind and heart. And that made it harder, but also more beautiful. I looked away, not because I was ashamed but because tears were rising, and I didn't want him to see. He didn't try to hold me. He didn't try to change my mind. He just let it be, and somehow that made me love him even more. The next morning, Mom drove me to the airport. She smiled the whole way, talking about how proud she was of me, how fast I'd grown up. She had no idea the emotional storm I was carrying inside me. At the gate, I hugged her first. Then I turned to Dennis. We stood there for a moment, unsure how to say goodbye. Finally, he offered his hand, as if to keep things simple. But I stepped forward and hugged him. Just once. Tight. Quiet. Final. As I boarded the plane, I looked back one last time. He was still there, one hand raised, eyes steady. No tears, just understanding. It's been months since then. I've started a new chapter of my life. I've grown. I've healed. And sometimes I still wonder if things had been different if he hadn't been married to my mom. What could we have been? But love, I've learned, isn't always meant to be claimed. Some love is meant to be let go oftenly, respectfully, and with gratitude. Because sometimes, the most honorable thing to people can do is walk away before they fall too far. And we did exactly that. If you find this story interesting, kindly subscribe and hit on notifications for more interesting stories like this.